Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, going to be one of your hosts. I'm going to be here with Mustafa Price as well, and this is episode 122, where we're going to be talking about the do's and don'ts of indie game crowdfunding. Now, Kickstarter has become a household name for the up-and-comers and those who support them. But with everything that Kickstarter has to offer for game creators, it can still be a challenge to navigate the crowdfunding landscape, trying to raise funds and build a community. From the perspective of someone who works for Kickstarter, we're going to be discussing some great tips and tricks to make a game stand out and some things to avoid. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, we're back, and I have Mustafa here with me, and I also have our guest, Anya Combs. Anya, how's it going?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. Well, we really appreciate you being on the show. And for those of you who don't know, Anya Combs is the Director of Games Outreach from Kickstarter. So we're really excited to have her on the show here. And Anya, why don't we just get right into it and give it to you? And if you could share a little bit more about what you do with Kickstarter, specifically with games, and how you help out indie devs a little bit. And also, what do you do like in your personal life? Or like what other types of things do you do for fun?
Sure. So yeah, I'm the director of games at Kickstarter. I am partially responsible for keeping the category going, make sure it's chugging along and whatnot. I've been in games about 12 years. I think this is my 12th year, maybe my 13th. I'm not sure. It's been a long time. And my focus has always been working with games creators, which is really cool. So I have a really weird and unique and fun job. What I specifically do at Kickstarter, though, is work with games creators who want to run Kickstarter projects. So that's anywhere from like right at the beginning of a project when someone's thinking of a project, or like a couple weeks to even a couple days, sometimes even a couple hours before people launch. Oh, wow. It's a lot of strategy. Yeah, it kind of runs the gamut. It's a lot of conversation. It's a lot of communication. That's definitely like a strong skill set that I weirdly have cultivated. So it's a really cool, interesting job. I get to kind of see games like right as they're about to kind of launch on Kickstarter, which means, right as they're kind of about to launch kind of out into the world, which is really cool. So it's very rewarding to like, see when a game kind of blows up when I've been working with the creator for a long time, which is pretty great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then what I do outside of Kickstarter, so I am a musician in New York City, although with COVID-19, that has kind of taken a little bit of a pause momentarily. We'll kind of see what happens with that. I'm still working on a couple of things here and there, recording a couple of things like in my apartment. But that's what I do when I'm not doing Kickstarter stuff.
Oh, cool. And what kind of music in particular?
I play the saxophone, so I play in mostly like brass bands here in New York. I play in a classical group that is indefinitely on hold. We'll see kind of how long, we'll see what happens there. Mostly just because we kind of rely on schools to rehearse in, and obviously all the schools are closed down for the foreseeable future, or at least until the next semester starts. But yeah, I play in a lot of brass bands, and then I do a little bit of freelancing on the side sometimes for people who just like want me to play on records and stuff, which is pretty cool.
Cool. One interesting thing I'm going to throw in there. Did you know that the saxophone is really technically in the woodwind family?
I did.
Okay. I would think that you would. I just found that out the other day because with all this like distance learning, and my son was learning about the different elements of the orchestra, and I had no idea that the saxophone was actually a woodwind because of it uses a reed. So
Yep. It's a weird instrument. It's actually kind of a joke instrument. It's kind of funny. So it kind of makes sense that I would pick it. But yeah, the history of the saxophone is fascinating. I definitely encourage people to like dive into that very, very weird rabbit hole.
All right. Well, we're going to go into a rabbit hole of our own here, and that's going to be the Q box round.
Awesome.
So, and what that is for anybody of you who aren't familiar with the Q Box round that are first-time listeners, it's just a series of random questions we're going to ask Anya here, and she's going to try to give us a quick and short answer to it. So, Anya, are you ready?
I think so. I'm gonna try my hardest here.
All right, awesome. All right, first one is zoo or aquarium?
Zoo or oh wow, like which one would I prefer to attend or go to? Oh gosh, that's so hard. I'm gonna go with aquarium.
Okay. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book is The Great Gatsby.
Nice. What's one thing that motivates you every day?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Wow, what is one thing that motivates me every day? Right now, it just kind of in the current state that we're in, I'm like, just get through the day. Just like trying to get through the day is the thing that motivates me.
Yeah.
I just kind of always want to be a little bit better than I was the day before.
Nice. That's a real good one right there.
Yeah.
Crayons, colored pencils, or Sharpies?
Sharpies.
All right. And what game are you playing right now?
Oh, Animal Crossing, like everyone else.
Right?
I guess to be fair, like I'm playing a lot of Animal Crossing, but I'm also now obviously with social distancing, I'm also playing a decent amount of Don't Starve and Mario Kart with some of my friends, which is really fun. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I started Gears 5, but I think I just need something that's like a little less apocalyptic.
Yeah, no. All right, well, great. That was definitely an excellent Q Box round, so thank you.
Cool.
All right, so now we're going to get into the meat of our discussion, which is pretty much the do's and don'ts of indie game crowdfunding. And Mustafa, I'm going to let you kick this off with our question here, and then we can just get right into the topic.
Yeah, certainly. And of course, Anya, I just want to thank you again, both for your excellent Q-Box answers and for, of course, working with us on this subject.
Yeah,
obviously, with it being in your wheelhouse, I think you'll give us a very interesting perspective where we've had it from the developers previously.
Cool.
Yeah, so I mean, to kind of initiate here, of course, the landscape for crowdfunding, especially for games, has changed quite a bit, over the last several years to a decade. So, and with indie games, and we talk about this a lot on here, being such an incredibly saturated and flooded market right now with everyone developing games so frequently, what would you attribute to kind of the success of Kickstarter in being like this sort of go-to name for crowdfunding for game projects?
Yeah, I think for video games, at least like what has made it pretty successful would definitely be Double Fine Adventure. I think the success of that really kind of brought in a lot of projects for the video game space. And one of the reasons I think that, games are so successful on Kickstarter, aside from these really great projects that have come, because in the tabletop space, we also have, Exploding Kittens, Gloomhaven, now Frosthaven, which just launched last week on Kickstarter, which made, I think, like $5 million in one day, which is wild. Games are... There's a lot of different reasons. This is kind of difficult to give like a concise answer. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that games at the end of the day are entertainment. They're art, right? And so there's this level of the consumer standpoint where like you kind of want to be close to the artist, right? Like you go to a concert to see the musician play. Like it's like I'm going to go see Beyonce live because I want to just be like within the same like air quality that she's like breathing, right?
Of course, yeah.
And I think Kickstarter kind of, to a certain degree, allows you that access to creators, specifically games creators that maybe you otherwise would not have access to, right? Like you can only do so much on Twitter, you can only do so much on Discord, but Kickstarter kind of really allows you to kind of like get in there a little bit more. But also just from like a functional standpoint, especially for tabletop games. And one of the reasons that we think that tabletop games are so successful on Kickstarter is because you kind of know exactly after talking to like a manufacturer and, you obviously can just do your research on shipping, although shipping is like a whole separate discussion in itself. You can kind of get a good sense of what that would be though. You know exactly how much you need to ask for. And so that's what your funding goal is. And it's very like formulaic in that sense. So tabletop games, it's just like, it's kind of a perfect marriage. It just makes a lot of sense. Video games obviously are a little bit more different just because there's a development sort of like challenge there. But if you are really mindful about your budget and you're really mindful about your development time and things like that, and just like keeping in mind that everything that you want to do may not be possible, and the perfect compromise is when two people are not happy. Like both parties basically like are not happy with what the compromise is. As long as you're willing to kind of like do that compromise, video games are very, very possible on Kickstarter.
Nice. I mean, and you talk a bit about that compromise, right? So what are some things that you have found that, finding compromises or things along that have worked really well in terms of, what makes a project really stand out?
In terms of, so what makes a project stand out?
Yeah. Like for if you have people that are, like you said, making those compromises and making understand to be, clear and forward of those things. Like with a project, what are the ones that really stand out for you?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things for me, there's a couple things. One is just like being as honest and vulnerable as you obviously are comfortable being. So just like being upfront and saying like, this is the story that I want to tell. People don't really like sort of like salesy pitches on Kickstarter. There's like a little bit more of a human element to it, which is one of my favorite things about it. Like if you're like, I want to make this game because I want to be a millionaire, people are going to be like, no, we don't really want to like be a part of this process with you. Like there is nothing wrong with that. If that is your goal, that's great. Go achieve it. Like good for you. But with Kickstarter, it very much is about, I have this idea. I want this story to be told and I want you to be a part of it with me. And when you really kind of can tap into that, like, I don't want to say like pulling on the heartstrings necessarily, because it's not like a Lassie come home sort of situation or anything like that. But there is definitely a level of honesty of just like, this is my thing. I'm putting my art out there, like come be a part of it with me, and being able to tap into that. And like the honesty that's attached to that is like really, really beneficial. Now, with that being said, there is sort of the other part of this, like two hands sort of situation. So the other part of this is that people also want to see, and I want to see that you've put the work in. You have the idea. That's great. That's awesome. What have you actually done to make this idea like come to life, right? And so do you have a prototype? Do you have a vertical slice? Do you have a demo? Like what is it that you actually have that we're able to see? So having equal hands heart and equal hands heart and equal hands, I hate to say this, but equal hands brain is like very, very much beneficial.
Okay. And you also you mentioned about like having, doing the work, having some of those things like a vertical slice and things along those lines. And let's say in light of that, or even some other things, like what would you say are some of the most effective themes that you've noticed in successful Kickstarter campaigns?
Yeah, so there's definitely a little bit of a formula. So you definitely need to have a video. It's definitely like not an option to not have a video. Your video doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be like robust or anything like that, but you do need to have at least 30 seconds of gameplay. Like that 30 seconds of gameplay is absolutely key, whether that's a video game or a tabletop game. Video games, obviously, it's like a little bit more important because with tabletop games, you can kind of do like the layout of things. But for video games, like we have to see what it is that you're trying to make. In addition to that, having GIFs kind of scattered throughout the page, like 3 or 4 GIFs of that gameplay, because you want to just sort of reinforce that this is kind of where the gameplay's at. That's definitely key. For tabletop, in lieu of any sort of GIFs are fine for tabletop, like great, awesome, gets the point across. But the sort of like marquee thing that you need to have is one image that shows everything that's going to be in the game. So if that's cards, show, here's all the cards laid out. If that's a board piece with miniatures and other fun things, make sure that you have one image that just like shows everything that's in there. And then in addition to that, I always really encourage people to have like a funding graph of some kind. I know those are kind of weird and like the breakdown of funds can always get a little bit tricky because you truthfully like don't want to have too many people too involved in your financials, right? Like I think we know that. But even just sort of like this is a